One of the most viewed YouTube videos in the Overwatch community in the past week has been Eskay's Why Ranked Feels So Miserable. Hint, it's not balanced, which got even more views when Flats reacted to it, and I want to combine all of their points together and make my own response video, seeing as discussing the state of ranked mode is one of my favorite topics in Overwatch. First, let's lay out some of Eskay's main points. A lot of new Overwatch players may not know how the rank system actually works because most of its functionality is based on Overwatch 1, but the visuals and feedback have been removed. So if you knew how the old system worked, you can sort of put 2 and 2 together to almost gain as much information as the previous system. But with the major changes in Overwatch 2, most information was either obfuscated or now tweaked to be kind of meaningless. What do I mean? Well, first of all, there is a matchmaking rating behind the scenes in most multiplayer games that is separate than your overall skill rating or public rank. Usually there's reasons for this, and the main one is your actual skill likely doesn't change too much over your tenure as a player unless you do serious improvement or maybe have a seriously bad day. Sometimes your player skill will change over long periods of time, but for the most part, it stays the same. However, to give players a sense of accomplishment, often these two ranks are kind of split so that you have something to earn, which especially matters in other games where you want to hold a top rank and need to play enough as opposed to simply just camping the MMR that you have, which ends up happening in Overwatch anyway. We'll get to that. So Overwatch launched with this 2-tiered rank system, but eventually sort of just went away from it entirely, but that does have drawbacks, and we'll get into those. Most importantly is the way that they obfuscate what your actual MMR or even phony fake rank, which doesn't exist anymore, even is. Since you don't get an update on what your rank has fallen or risen to after each match, which is common in most multiplayer games. Instead, that math is happening behind the scenes, and you only find out where you end up once you pass a certain threshold of games played, either 5 wins or the drastic 15 losses. All the while, your visible rank is locked in place. You're supposed to kind of not look at it. The goal in mind there was to separate the player from the match-to-match feeling of losing or gaining SR and just get you to play more and check in on it later. But that might work if most players, especially competitive players, sort of just ignored their rank. A lot of them don't, and they want to obsess over exactly what it is and how their rank is being affected. So for example, there's some interesting anomalies in this system that get revealed to be a problem, and if you don't know the actual science or math behind it, it can be confusing really quick. So a few examples of this are if you are a higher rated player and play in a series of lower rated games, you're going to be advantaged or expected to win those games. So because of that, you might even win 5 cards in a row and not rank up or rank up very little, because at the end of the day, it isn't necessarily just about pure wins and losses. It is about the context of the opponents you played against.
I went 5-1. I need to be GM.
Now, in theory, the matchmaker is supposed to find you opponents of a similar skill tier, but on average, they might be like half a rank below you or above you. It can happen in reverse too, but usually the perspective is when you're dropped into lower lobbies. Because, of course, nobody complains if they perform well in a higher tier series of games and then rank up super quick. But that doesn't seem to happen now, does it? More likely, you're going to notice the ranked gameplay to feel normal when you're in evenly matched or perhaps favored games. The games where you're unfavored, you just write off as, well, the matchmaker's broken. But if you understand how these systems work, you have to expect that you're going to be unfavored at least some of the time. And what's tricky with all of this, knowing that it is an ELO system, what we should do or care about is knowing that in those times where we aren't favored, it's actually okay to lose if you are appropriately rated. But for some reason, us as humans and gamers, we can't wrap our heads around that phenomenon. It makes a little bit more sense if you watch like a college sports team versus a pro sports team. You know one of them is going to be better, but in our competitive multiplayer gaming life, we expect somehow it to feel fair. Well, competition isn't fair. And I'll tell you this, back in the day, let's say more competitive ranked systems like ones Blizzard invented after all, pioneering ranked ELO systems in video games in StarCraft, both set a series of expectations for competitive games, but also revealed some facts about player psychology. You see, even when given all of the information that I just told you, you, and knowing that you're not favored to win and feeling maybe a little bit better when you ultimately lose that kind of match because you won't lose as much elo or SR, it still feels bad and punishing, and you don't get a sense of reward and all of that. So the Overwatch 2 system was trying to casualize this to make it more approachable, but then sort of destroys the entire concept for high-level competitive gameplay where a lot of these streamers and content creators reside. Okay, so that was like setting the foundation of the conversation. Let's go back now to talking about some of Eskay's really interesting points. Eskay had a really interesting point about the card system, where something that we lost that we used to have in Overwatch 1 was when it was a pure number that you knew what your rank was, or at least the earned rank, not your hidden MMR, which now is the same thing. You used to be able to, let's say, go on a 4-win streak, reach a new career high, actually see what that number is, and even if you fall from there, your accomplishment is locked in as your new peak. Well, now it's possible that if you start a new card and go on that same 4-win streak, reaching the highest rating you've ever got, but then go on a loss streak afterwards, you could potentially lose 15 games and be like 2 ranks below your actual peak that you'll never get an accomplishment for because it doesn't update you until you actually finish the card. So that sounds like an incredibly niche scenario, but that is exacerbating hiding this information, how bad it can actually get, that you can get completely robbed of those small achievements because you're not actually being told the information of where you're at. And what I'm really curious about is that has this actually succeeded in making more casual players be interested in ranked? Because we knew top tier players weren't going to like this system. We've been giving them this feedback for over a year now, it feels like. Top tier competitive players don't need to have the information taken off the table from them because they're grinding the game anyway. It just all feels like a way to get you to ignore the actual rank as much as possible and look at it like later on down the line. Funnily enough, that works for me oftentimes and helps me focus on the gameplay, but I think a lot of hardcore players don't care about that and don't need that necessarily. Maybe I'm just more emotionally sensitive to losing rank because I'm not quite at the top 500 all the time level. I'm at the once in a while, if I really train, I can be a top 500 player, but just inside GM is like where I can rest. And if you know anything about high level Overwatch, there's like 10 ranks within GM between actual bottom GM and top of the best of the best. And I think this is where my opinion largely is going to deviate from the likes of Flats and Eskay, because for me, as my queue times start to get intense, I really lose the motivation to sink my entire day into grinding Overwatch top tier ranked and getting the best rank I can. I love the game, but I don't stream. And I think that's the major difference. If you're a streamer, you're supposed to dedicate long hours to playing ranked. And while I can do things in my 10+ minute support queues, the experience of doing it is prohibitive. So there is no accomplishment you're going to give me that really changes my mind about it. Peek into top 500, great. Get my GM card, great. I personally can't relate to their experience, and well, 99.9% of players can't either. I do think the devs should dedicate resources in order to refine the top 500 system, but I also see why it hasn't been a priority for them yet. But top 500 aside, let's think about the card system and ranked in general and how it affects everybody. Another really good criticism Eskay had about the card system is that when you're on a loss streak on a card, you hold that card so much and for so long that getting to those 5 wins just to know you're gonna derank anyway is also demoralizing. Like losing the rank game to game is demoralizing, okay? But saving up all the losses when you're on a bad streak, like I'm not sure losing feels any better necessarily. Like maybe they stopped that ranked anxiety problem because you're sort of deferring your losses into one big negative chunk of time. But as you clue into what's gonna happen, you just sort of dread playing anyway, knowing that the update is gonna be bad. It took me a while in Overwatch to actually get to a 15 loss card. I'm almost proud of that achievement. I was playing on my laptop instead of my PC, and well, it's a little bit difficult to perform at the same level. I did notice personally that it felt a lot easier to rack up those losses because I didn't see the negative downside of my rank going down. So for me, it does trick me into playing longer and to look after a while, oh shoot, is that 10 losses and 3 wins? It's sort of like when you've had a bad diet for months and step on the scale and are like, oh my goodness, did I really do that? Why did I have to eat Dairy Queen every day for the last 2 months? That's sort of what it feels like. So again, the more you're paying attention, the less effect this sort of bait and switch, smoke and mirrors, hiding the information is going to affect you. I pay more attention when it's on support, the role I actually care about, and a little bit less attention when I'm playing ranked on the other roles. So I'm curious what you guys, as either casual or really hardcore players, feel about the card system in general. And there's a lot of oversights with the system, of course, like because your rank was changing behind the scenes, if you begin a card but don't finish it, then the season ends, you're going to get an update based on whatever the math added up to anyway. So that's really annoying for me. Honestly, it's always just sort of felt like a half-baked idea, and over time they keep changing it to be closer to the first game anyway. So the card system is one of the more obvious strange faults, which I'm skeptical on its actual effects. Eskay talks about how you can no longer select your own region, which matters for high-level gameplay. You have to get a third-party VPN, which is really punishing for high-level players in regions with smaller player pools. A subject that Flats brought up in his reply video is queue times, which have progressively gotten worse, and let's remember that they were pretty proud of their ability to tweak the matchmaker to be more strict than before. Earlier in Overwatch's lifespan, the matchmaker was faster at creating matches, but a bit looser on the restrictions of the skill ranges that it allowed in a match. This meant for some players to stand out more than you should expect. However, in my opinion, and Flats says this as well, I haven't noticed a massive change in the, let's say, quality of the matches. According to Blizzard, they define that as if they are successfully able to predict which team is supposed to win on paper. Because what they can do is look at certain data like, okay, the matchmaker thinks this is a perfectly even match, but it's a snowball. One team destroys the other. Or other cases where it's a small favor for one team. If they do win, well, that sort of validates the prediction of what the matchmaker expected to happen. So when things are working normally, they have an indicator called match quality being high. So they've tightened that up a bit in theory, but my personal belief of match quality hasn't changed too much. From the subjective point of view, I feel the steamrolls and uneven matches often will happen more based on the specific player skill sets and matchup knowledge of who you have in your lobby. So I'll give you an example. There's some situations where you would love to have a at your rank Widowmaker one trick. You're playing on Havana or Junkertown, the enemy don't have a Widowmaker player and you do, that might be a massive advantage. Then there's other times where maybe you're playing Control on a very brawly point and the enemy is just rushing to point with Symmetra. And the enemy just say, hey, we're gonna hide here on point, good luck getting here. And you have a character on your team that needs to snipe and they're just hiding, holding the point and eventually win. Same player, same MMR, completely different situations. In one case, hard throw, the other case, hard carry. That's an extreme example, but there's so many examples like this. There's so many skill checks in the game, whether it's does your team know where to position and how to shoot up at characters like Genji and Pharah? Do they know how to counter Doomfist? And fun ones to me is, do they know how to counter off-meta picks? Because just because there's weak or lower win rate characters in the game doesn't mean they don't win sometimes, right? Like, if you don't have experience playing against Roadhog on Ilios Well, doesn't matter how bad Hog is, he can win that round single-handedly if he keeps pulling specifically your tank into the hole. So you see how these examples are like so extreme and they have nothing to do really with the matchmaker, in my opinion. They have all to do with the map, the random teammate you got, and whether or not it just happens to sync up with what they're good at. Overwatch is too chaotic of a game for me to expect the matchmaker to do much, which is why ultimately I agree with Flats when he says that he preferred it when the queue times were just lower. Just let more players into matches quicker, because these blowouts are just gonna happen in Overwatch anyway. It's not like tightening up the matchmaking restriction changed the steamroll problem. Instead, Aaron Keller has said in blog posts that they're looking to deal with that in other ways, which is a much bigger, like, long-term Overwatch formatting discussion that I'm excited for them to have sooner rather than later. But now we at least have to understand that the enemy can counterpick you at any point. We're playing free swap, free pick, hero select. There's no draft. There's no way to know what map you're going to play. So you might just load in and get countered and, well, that's it, GG. That's how the game works. So since that is such a big component on whether your team even has the capability of playing the game well or not in that given match, I don't really rate having the quote unquote skill level needing to be completely even, because we're not playing an even game anyway. And the meta keeps changing as well. Like the season 6 meta is like deployment and slow cooldown exchange based. It's almost like double shield or goats all of a sudden. That's how the game's playing again. And I've kind of liked it because I always succeed more in these slower metas where I have time to think. Now, give me a Widowmaker or Hog meta, get me out of there. We've had those earlier in Overwatch 2, and I couldn't compete in those other than playing maybe Kiriko and cleansing my Hog. But you see, every player is kind of like this, where they have their certain strengths and they're going to go up or down based on a lot of factors, not just the matchmaker. So anyway, match quality, the queue times raising and having tighter match quality has not improved ranked, in my opinion. And although they put a lot of work into refining that matchmaker, I just as easily see them undo some of that and just loosen it up. Okay, so I talked a little bit about balance there, and Eskay's video specifically was, it's not about balance, but I also don't blame balance necessarily because everyone's view on it is different regardless. So it's not like they're going to achieve balance. There's always something that kind of gets the short end of the stick. Just depends on what percentage of the game gets it at once. But Eskay goes on to talk about how the top 500 system is just not great. Let's go into some depth about that, especially now that there is no split between SR and MMR. They can't actually decay your rank because your rank is just your MMR now. That was one benefit to them being split, that let's say you are the best player in the world, but you don't play that much. Well, it's a little lame if other players can never reach you because you're just resting at an MMR that's unobtainable for them and you just hold the top spot forever without even playing. So having them split means that they could find ways to decay your public ranking, but the matchmaker itself would know, well, actually, no, that's the best player in the world. Even though their ranking maybe puts them lower on the leaderboard, we're going to match them knowing that it's the best player in the world. Well, now there's no way to really decay your public ranking, so camping your SR is much easier. They tried to reset the ranks between the seasons, doing that soft SR public rank achievement-based rank thing, and it confused everybody, so they removed that, but also that means we've lost the ability to achieve something public. Now, luckily, I'll say the player progression system ideally is going to change up where your focus is on that kind of thing. So it feels like the game is actually tracking your progress over time, that playing it is achieving something, even if it is just a challenge or a checklist. I like that personally. But now your rank is a bit more objective, which interestingly enough helps in many ways, but then hurts in when it comes to like camping top 500. Mainly because top 500 has this really stupid system where as long as you get into it at some point, it doesn't matter where your SR actually is. It just matters that you're among the top 500 at a given time. The reason why that's a problem is that if you race to the first 50 games, well, the start of when top 500 came out, the tanks had so low playtime because the meta was really punishing. It was not that popular of a role for high level players. So there was diamond players that were technically top 500 for a couple weeks for some period of time. And that goes on their player profile, just sort of devaluing the entire concept. So what's strange about that is they want to show your peak to give you something to show off, but when they devalue what it means and make it too easy in some contexts to cheese, and it's no offense to any of those players that got it, it's like just a silly way to make the system because they won't hold it at the end of the season when everyone catches up to the number of games played. Like there shouldn't be a racing to play more games first and get what's supposed to be the most desirable thing in all of ranked, right? It's just silly for that to work that way. It doesn't make any sense. Alternatively, they could give the top 500 reward just at the end of the season, but then you wouldn't like see the progress of where you peak. But overall, the main problem to me here is it shouldn't be a top 500 system anyway. It should just be a public MMR or SR or whatever. So you actually can see the skill rating of everybody. And what I think would make more sense is if they just like had that full complete list, but grayed out the players who hadn't played enough games yet. So while yes, maybe you on page 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever it is in Diamond are technically top 500 for the first couple days, you know, well, there's all these players that are higher ranked above me that I have to bypass. Or maybe a filter they could put on the list that does that. Because obviously like anybody who played in the past can fill in there and kind of idle in that list too, which we don't want. We want it to be like active and fluid so that you can approach it and have a chance to compete in it for that given season. And there's not a benefit to camping it from seasons ago, but at the same time, giving those rewards away frivolously is kind of silly. And I think they can split the difference on that. Those were my major takeaways from the discussion started by Eskay and continued by Flats regarding the rank system. I'm curious to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let us know what kind of player you are and how the Overwatch 2 rank system affects you. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.